the tone of footprint forums may be light, but hopefully the content isn't. And in that spirit, I'd like to use my chair's prerogative to be a little bit challenging in my intro, because it feels to me like the decarbonisation agenda is at something of a crossroads. We've seen the political consensus on net zero, both at home and abroad, fracture at a time when extremes of weather are becoming ever more commonplace, and scientists are warning that the ambition to keep global warming within that 1.5 degree threshold is almost out of reach. We've seen some companies rein in their sustainability targets that have either proved too ambitious or too disruptive to their legacy business models, depending on your perspective. And while there's clearly lots of excellent, diligent work still going on within the sector, our sector, and the food industry more broadly to embed sustainability, including decarbonisation, within core business strategies, we're also hearing murmurs of discontent from sustainability leaders about their lack of agency to affect meaningful change at boardroom level. You'll all, I'm sure, have read or heard about the memo that was circulating a few months ago, published anonymously by senior industry insiders, warning of a sector-wide failure to tackle a series of interconnected crises within the food system that threaten the future viability of their businesses. This is serious, sober stuff from senior professional people. So I think the message is that while we're still talking a good game on sustainability, perhaps we're still not quite delivering the structural change in how businesses and markets operate that needs to happen at scale to make real those good intentions. And it's in this context that today we're discussing the role of data in driving deep decarbonisation. Because narratives alone, however passionate and urgent, will not be sufficient to persuade those leadership teams that still need persuading on the case for net zero to act decisively on it. High quality data can help build that business case as well as the moral case for deep decarbonisation, whether that's by highlighting opportunities to achieve efficiencies and cost savings, evidencing the positive impact of interventions on carbon reduction, identifying areas of exposure to future supply chain risks. And I think resilience is a word that has bubbled to the surface of late, and I hope remains there for some time. And data, of course, can also underpin the alignment of contracts and incentives with climate goals. And we'll be digging into that subject, particularly in the second panel today. And so the purpose of today's forum is really to show in a very practical way how data can be used to centre sustainability and resilience within long-term business strategy and align a decarbonisation agenda with commercial success. And I'm delighted to get us underway by inviting Anya Doherty, Foodsteps founder and CEO, to deliver our first keynote presentation. So Anya, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here. Let me try some clicking. Oh, great. Okay. Yes, wonderful to be here today to talk to you about using data to drive decarbonisation and avoiding inaction. That's what I meant to do. As Nick said, I'm Anya Doherty. I'm founder and director at Foodsteps, and we work with food businesses to help measure, reduce, and communicate the environmental impacts of food. So I've spent pretty much all my time in the weeds with data. That's emission factor data, data from food companies, trying to bring those two things together in a meaningful way. And since I've got the sort of kick-off piece here, I thought I'd take some time to just talk through what hopefully we can all agree are the challenges when it comes to environmental data, but then also to give you a couple of the highlights that I think can really help us to make the most of data in sustainability. So this will probably be familiar to most of you, but as we all know, food businesses have got so much competing data and priorities, sustainability, nutrition, commercial viability, and trying to bring that all together to make some pretty complex decisions is at the heart of it, the trouble and problem that we have. What kinds of data do we work with, and probably you're all familiar with? There's business data, procurement, sales, product and menu, environmental data, emission factors, the complexities around regional variation, and as well as other things like nutrition data, allergens, etc. And so, yeah, that's really just sort of framing the challenge that I know we all have about how do we kind of use all of that source data and bring it together into something meaningful. But the things that I most commonly hear about when it comes to data challenges, I think everyone faces these, are really three things. Firstly, inconsistent data, and that can be both in your business data as well as in the environmental impact data. There's so many ways that, that data just doesn't join up. It's patchy. When you actually start to look under the hood of emission factors, it's patchier than a lot of people think. And then combining kind of patchy emission factor data with patchy business data just feels very wrong, but it happens a lot. Secondly, the quality of the data. So even when you have got data, we hear a lot that the quality just doesn't feel like it's actually representative of the business function. So that could be, for example, you're using a lot of proxies or secondary emission factors. It could be that your data in your own company is out of date or just not very high quality. And then the third problem that we hear a lot about is this challenge around scaling. So even if you could see a good data solution, it's sort of impossible to envision that actually happening at scale across the business. So you might be able to see a path for a couple of products about how you could get better data, but it just seems like an impossible task to kind of scale that up to the whole business. So hopefully some of those things sound familiar. So now I just want to move on to really, in just a couple of minutes, what I think the two really optimistic things are here around data and how we can actually be using this to cut through those problems that I just framed. The first one is about the progress that I think is actually happening in some of the right places in government and in NGOs that I think we should be optimistic about and can rely on to solve some of these problems. And then the second one is a single slide that I think is something that's so overlooked by everyone in the industry about how we can, cut through the noise here. So it's a 1-2. So number one, this is about some of the improvements that I think are happening in the industry that we can all take a lot of optimism from. So particularly around the Food Data Transparency Partnership, there's quite an exciting stream called Led for Food that we've also partnered on, and that's about standardising secondary emission factor data, trying to create a common glossary and knowledge base around how in the UK we actually just use consistent environmental impact data for food. Because it's government run, it's going to be a bit slower than perhaps we might like, but I do think it's a really optimistic thing we can look forward to, that this work is actually happening. Secondly, you'll probably all be familiar with the RAP Scope 3 protocols for food and drink, but I do think there's a really strong opportunity for all of us here to actually feed more into those protocols, because that should be the basis for what we're all using as an industry. And I know that RAP are really open to receiving feedback and improving those protocols. We've worked quite a lot with RAP on sharing our feedback from actually applying this in the real world. And so I'd really encourage as many people to do that so we can keep improving the protocols that we all rely on. And then thirdly, there's a great organisation and project called Hestia that some of you might be familiar with at University of Oxford that's standardising agricultural and production data. So I do think from a kind of emission standpoint, it's not necessarily in the best place now, but I do think over the next couple of years we can see some exciting improvements and standardisation to come, and hopefully more people can get involved in that as well. And now for my one slide that I really wish, if I had to sort of say one thing I've really learnt and one kind of bit of advice to anyone, is just how concentrated the impact of your food will be in a very small number of products compared to your whole portfolio. And I've actually been so surprised by this, because I probably would have thought, okay, maybe half of your products are about 80% of your impact or that type of thing. But across a lot of the food businesses we've worked with, it's actually sometimes like 3 to 10% of the products are having 80 to 90% of the impact. And I just think we can't really stress that enough when we think about data, which is if it's 3 to 10% of your products having the majority of the impact, you have just basically times 10/times 30 lessened your problem with data by focusing only on those products that actually matter. And I think we've kind of got it in our heads that we need to be looking at everything, and somehow if we don't capture it all, that we're doing a bad job. And I think, imagine if all of us here in this room just focused on those 3 to 10% of products that were having 80% of the impact. We could have so much less stress about the data. We could align so much better on how we approach that smaller number of things, and we could probably get the vast majority of the way towards our goal and then work out how to deal with the 20% later. So yeah, that is something that I feel is a really important keystone to this whole discussion about data, is let's not focus on such a confusing big picture. Let's just make the problem smaller and easier to deal with. So once you have that kind of focus, and that might be 3% of your data, it might be 10% of your data, I rarely see it be more than 15 or 20% of people's products actually contributing more than 50%. This can then allow you to actually focus and target those efforts in the ways that they matter. So you can then actually start to do things like engaging your suppliers with primary data, or looking at reduction opportunities with suppliers, or refining in a more detailed way how you actually reduce the impact of those products. And I think doing that in a much more targeted way is, I think the biggest kind of role that we've got for improving data and using it effectively. And so to sort of wrap this up, you could say data maturity is really just not a linear journey. You can take the first biggest step with actually not very much effort, and after that it will be a massively long tail that will probably be insanely hard to tackle. But I think that non-linearity is actually a real cause for hope and optimism, because we can just make the problem so much smaller and still have a much more outsized impact today. And we do need to accelerate, and we do need to be doing a lot more sooner. And so let's kind of take that first step, but make sure that it's actually a step we can handle. A small step can go quite a long way at this point. So that was my message.
Thank you very much, Anya. It's a really strong key takeout from that focus on the areas of greatest impact. I think a nice, easy, simple message to take away. So thank you, Anya. Need you back at the front, I'm afraid, for the panel session. So, and can I ask Andrew and Meredith to join you, please? So in this session, we're going to talk a little bit about embedding decarbonisation into core business strategy. Here we go. So yes, embedding decarbonisation into core business strategy and how data can support the case for boardroom action. So I guess the sort of more strategic side of data, and then in panel 2 we're going to get into some of the more practical examples. So from my far left we have Andrew Peat. Andrew is Head of Energy Management at ISS. Meredith Ford is UK and Ireland Head of Sustainability at SSP Group, and of course Anya, who you've already met. So before we get into the discussion, it might be useful, Andrew and Meredith, just for those who aren't familiar with ISS and SSP Group, if you can just very briefly explain a little bit about the organisation and your role within it. So Meredith, do you want to go first?
Yeah, definitely. Hello. So SSP operate food outlets in train stations and airports. So they've got a business that is franchise, so we run M&S, Burger King and Starbucks outlets, and then they also run own brands, so brands like Upper Crust and A&T Coffee. Millie's Cookies is probably my personal favourite. So yeah, quite a wide range of products and also kind of customer experience is part of that.
So ISS are a facilities management company, so as well as our own targets and emissions, we're also delivering services to a number of customers. So we are either helping them support them with their decarbonisation and also trying to limit our impact on them as quite a major contributor to their emissions profile.
Super, thank you. Anya, I'm going to let you recover your voice for a few moments. I'm interested in picking up on one of Anya's points about, I guess, not letting perfect data get in the way of good enough data. Meredith, to what extent do you feel you've got a high degree of visibility over your total emissions footprint across the business? And are there any sort of gaps that you feel need plugging or where data quality could still improve?
Yeah, I mean, it's not bad. We've been on the journey, I suppose, of improving this for the last maybe three years for quite a concerted effort. Our partner in this space is Clamato for recipe-level carbon footprints. We have prioritised getting more granular and accurate data in the areas where we have influence. So I suppose I'd also overlay onto that point that Anya made about what has the biggest impact, but also where can you influence. So, for example, if we have a big kind of range or menu review coming up for a cluster of restaurants, that's where we'll invest our energy on making sure the data behind that is accurate because we can probably influence it in the short term, versus perhaps some of our more retail operations where we buy in packaged products and have less influence at this stage in the journey. So yeah, it's in a decent place. I think, yeah, what's become increasingly clear as we kind of go down this journey is that, as you start to learn the core facts of, which products have higher emissions and which ingredients are kind of more impactful from the environment, actually the specificity of the data perhaps becomes slightly less critical, just kind of for the stage that we are at the moment. In terms of the gaps, I mean, there's a few. One is just in terms of, from quite a boring perspective, managing the database that we have and making sure that when recipes change, we reflect that in the carbon level data. But there's also one that I think is quite, we need to solve from a motivational point of view, which is that at the moment we've got that really granular data at recipe level, but we're not yet able to draw a line between that and our total Scope 3 reporting because we're still using spend-based for that wide-scale total reporting. So that means we're doing this brilliant work and we can talk about it at kind of restaurant or kind of brand level, but we can't yet celebrate that work in our total Scope 3 reporting. And at some point, I think that will start to feel demotivating if we can't do that.
Super, thank you. And Andrew, I know your focus is more on energy and particularly Scope 1 and 2 emissions. I think visibility tends to be greater in those areas than it is for purchased goods, for example. Do you feel you've got a pretty good grasp on your emissions footprint? Are there any obvious gaps within your business?
Yes, I think the issue is consistency.
Yep.
So both with ISS and for customers we're delivering with, the hope would be we've got AMR granular half-hourly data that is available, but that isn't always the case. So I think it comes back to the point made earlier that it's working with the data we have to drive that change while simultaneously trying to drive those data improvements. So if we're not stood still waiting for the data to be available to drive action, because there's actions that we know can be taken and will deliver a benefit, which also will allow us to then take the time, demonstrate the benefit of delivering the work, to invest in improving data, improving that availability, to drive that momentum. But the granularity then allows us to deliver additional activity, delivering more benefit that then can hopefully be reinvested.
We obviously got scope for questions today, so have a think if there's any burning questions based on what the panel have said or just generally based on the agenda that was circulated beforehand, and we'll come to those shortly. A key theme of today is how to use data to influence decision makers. And so, I mean, we're a room full of, I imagine, mostly sustainability professionals here. We live and breathe this stuff, right? But those with the levers of power to affect change perhaps don't live and breathe it. So, Anya, you've, I imagine, had lots of conversations with senior business leaders. How literate our leadership teams within the food sector in environmental data, would you say?
I would say it varies massively. I'd say, I mean, oftentimes we're working with the sustainability leads, and of course, many of you are in the room, total experts. I do think from that to the kind of exec board who maybe don't have sustainability in the title, we've seen quite a big drop in literacy. I think especially a lack of interest in some of the nuances and complexities that we will face in the work that we all do day to day, which makes sense because you're trying to kind of deliver a key message and then caveat it with 400 things about how the data actually doesn't do this, and the emission factors are slightly different from the ones you used last year, so the message you're trying to make isn't really what you're saying. And I think that whole piece is just overwhelming for someone who is in a role that doesn't have to deal with this day to day. So I think we've evolved with a lot of the partners that we have in helping to support these kind of conversations. And where I think it's got to is a couple of sort of tried and tested, like 3-slide deliverables that just keep the messages insanely succinct, clear, and then have that kind of one slide at the end that does explain some of the nuances and caveats. But generally, I think it just is challenging for someone in a role who doesn't deal with this day to day to try and sort of craft that message themselves when it comes with a lot of complexity.
Meredith, at the risk of getting you into trouble, how do you see that from an SSP group perspective in terms of environmental literacy amongst your senior colleagues? And I guess what are the key arguments that you can deploy in your role to persuade business leaders of the strategic commercial value in a decarbonisation agenda?
Yeah, so honestly, it hasn't been a barrier yet, that kind of literacy point. I think we have kind of by design focused on talking about 2 or 3 KPIs that you can explain. Well, I was going to say explain once, then keep going back to, but explain every time, but kind of build on that familiarity and knowledge. So whether it's, I think the ones that we generally go for would be understanding what it means to have a kind of Climato rating A or B, which means low, how that relates to our total emissions footprint, and then that kind of overlay of sales volume against the different rating scales to give us a picture of mix. And to be honest, that's kind of been okay and enough to have the conversations that we need to have at this point. I haven't yet needed to have the really, really nuanced conversations at that level. That can kind of happen at the lower level where we're trying to influence the action. I'm sure I'll come into challenges in the future, but for now, that's kind of not been too much of an issue. I think the kind of complexity that I'm aware of is sort of not minimizing that sort of true complexity that exists in sustainability, and obviously the kind of carbon tunnel vision that we always talk about at these sorts of events. It's super important, but it shouldn't be the only thing that we talk about. In terms of motivating arguments, I suppose increasingly I think we're getting better at telling the really kind of tight commercial story around sustainability. So we actually a couple of weeks ago had this conversation ourselves with an SSP, which is that we sort of see that short term there are kind of win-wins in the sustainability space. There are lots of things that aren't, but you can focus your energy on the things that are, energy being a really good one. So from our programme with automated meter readings in almost every unit, we're saving, hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. That's really, really easy as a sell-in, obviously. I think it starts to become a slightly more challenging narrative in the medium term, some of those kind of opportunities. I guess at SSP, we are quite lucky in that we have clients. So although we are a retailer food service provider, we have clients who are airports and train stations, and they're really demanding in their sustainability expectations of us. So again, we can sell that medium term kind of payback story. It's really helpful to be able to share, for example, like we're working on a tender for some new space. 20% of the points are reflective of our ESG portion of the proposal. So that's great, because that's really, really helpful for me to be able to quantify the potential benefit associated with our work in sustainability. I do think, longer term, the resilience point we've mentioned already, that feels like it will be the direction of travel. At the moment, that isn't yet a kind of impactful narrative for me to drive change. I think it's quite a scary narrative, which I'm successfully scaring people, which is good, I think. Feels good, certainly. But I think, until we have the kind of maturity across the market overall that we can say, okay, damn, coffee is really sensitive. We should be growing it under shade because that will protect it from heat shocks. Until we can then say, great, let's go and buy shade-grown coffee at scale. I don't think we're there yet. So it isn't yet a lever for change, but I eagerly anticipate the point at which it is.
And just picking up on that, is that in part because it's hard to put figures, hard data around future supply chain risk, for example? And not, I mean, with energy, or
Yeah.
Andy, you're working in energy, the kind of cost savings and carbon reduction quite neatly coalesce, I would suggest, where energy management is concerned. But actually sort of, putting hard data to how investment in more regenerative agricultural practices can help support long-term, viability and protect against supply chain volatility. That's got to be a really hard kind of argument to make at a leadership level.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that will become a problem. I don't think we're even there yet. So as in, I think even now, I mean, I shared some charts just around the increase in core commodity pricing over the last year. It's scary enough and the numbers are big enough that even if it's not all reflective of climate impacts and some of it is other variables, it's still quite alarming and would motivate action. I think probably the bigger barrier now is that, we've started talking about that this year, candidly. So to be able to sort of have the right teams, have the headspace to be able to then think about what that means from an action and next step perspective, it's just not an overnight. It's just not an overnight transition.
Yeah. Before we move on to questions, Andy, just perhaps you can share with us some of the, I guess, sort of key pieces of data you like to present to leadership teams that really sort of show the commercial strategic value in decarbonisation.
I suppose the biggest one we've got at the moment is, as a commercial business, there's more and more performers to even be able to go and bid, but we need to be demonstrating that we have our sustainability, our transition plan in place, and that we're actively delivering against it to be able to even get in the room to have those conversations, let alone how more prevalent sustainability, social value, those elements are becoming within these bids. So we need to have our processes in place, both as an individual organisation looking at ourselves, as well as the services to be able to deliver, to be able to meet the expectations that our clients are now asking for. And it's easy to do it to ourselves if it's something we're delivering as our service, because our portfolio in terms of in the UK as a office estate, as the amount we're actually purchasing for ourselves and our impact is relatively low, but what we're delivering out for our customers, our fleet usage, the food services we're delivering and those elements are really significant. So it's quite simple for us to be delivering those to ourselves if we have those processes in place and how we're delivering it for our customers, which is where we can offer commercial value because we have this best practice that we can be then selling out to the market. It is then having that data to show the benefit. Energy, as you mentioned, is quite a good one because the data is there, it's quite transactional. We make an action, we see a saving, and how would you like us to talk about it? In pounds, in carbon, consumption, not so much, but we can tailor it to a metric to get that point really clear. And it's back to that point of the SLT, it's or the country leadership team of pitching the information in the context that people are understanding or interested in to be able to drive those decisions.
Any questions at this stage? Claire?
It's not necessarily a question, it was more of a comment, if you like, and it sort of picks up on what you were asking earlier, Nick. Have you seen TCFD, the connection between, I guess, of what you're doing, Anya, and that board level influence and the risk and resilience piece linking through to TCFD? Like the question almost being asked down, like how are our food systems impacting this? Because I feel like it feels a bit, TCFD feels very useful, but it just doesn't quite seem to be useful yet. It feels like it could be, but I haven't really seen it actually have impact yet.
Yeah, I would say in our experience, not very joined up. So it does feel like something, I guess it was not really designed as much for kind of the type of industry that, food is, but it is applicable. I think, it would be lovely to see that more joined up with the SBTI and kind of wrap work and linking in that risk as well as emissions piece. So yeah, it's a good point, I think. Murmurs, but definitely no bridges yet.
Yeah, Max Kinsman with NHS. Annie, you mentioned about RAP being a key place for you to go to. Do you see RAP as a sustainable long-term organisation? Because obviously government funding is disappearing from various places. Do you think RAP is going to be able to keep up that work to standardise those kind of scope 3 pieces?
Yeah, great question. I don't know the details about their sort of funding. I know that they have been contracted with DEFRA for a lot of the delivery of DEFRA's food sustainability agenda. So that is promising, and I think there's at least 3 years left on some of those contracts, which is good. But yeah, I mean, who knows? I guess it ultimately does come down to kind of government priority. And I think there is always a risk with these things if they are kind of led by government that it could fall by the wayside a bit. But I'd say in absence of anything else, I do think, especially in the UK, we have to have a single place that we as an industry try to put effort and resources. And I know a lot of businesses here are probably members of Courtauld and things like that help to fund RAP as well.
Thank you. Mike Hanson, WSH. Question for Meredith. Thank you very much, by the way. You mentioned you have spend-based data and for your main scope 3 calculations, and you're using Tomato for your sort of recipe level. We use Nutritics in the same way. Sorry, Anya. I've just you mentioned that there's no connection between the two, and I just wanted to say that I think there possibly is, because actually the tomato, the recipe based data you're getting is actually driving some behaviour, so that will flow through into your scope 3. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, there definitely will be a link in places. It's perhaps a bit more theoretical than practical than I'd like at the moment. Also, they will punish me if I don't correct you from tomato to climato. But yeah, I think that, for example, right now we're using an emissions factor for meat, fish and poultry that's average. A lot of the work that we're doing is to say, okay, in that ragu, at the moment it's got pork and beef. Can we slightly shift the mix between those two? So it's those sorts of initiatives. And I think because we have, and I think rightly, invested our energy in initiatives that won't necessarily be that visible to the customer, because in terms of narratives that are compelling for leadership, like customer demand, unfortunately, just isn't there in the same way we'd like to see it. So a lot of the work we've been doing is like hybrid products and, small tweaks that therefore might end up within the same emissions factor, but being a better version of it. I think that's the bit that I really want to motivate and reward for. But yeah, that's a good point.
Bob.
Yeah, like Claire, I don't know if I've got a question or a comment, but I'm just kind of reflecting on the headline question of data supporting the case for boardroom action. And I guess there's two challenges I've got to it. The first is, I actually think we live in a time, I think we've always lived in a time where stories are more powerful than data, but never before has it been so true as it is today, where you've got, in some political spheres at least, a complete absolution from the truth. And that is beginning to influence people's perspectives on climate, particularly, say, for example, the reform narrative in the UK is absolutely influencing people's perspectives. And I wonder, I guess, if I come to my question, is the boardroom as bought in as it was a year ago? And that's firstly because they've been influenced by food rather than data. And secondly, because there are real pressures on business where the climate is often falling into second or third or lower level positions. So you made the point about resilience not being that important a driver. In my experience, actually, recently in the last year or so, resilience has been a much more powerful driver. In part, it's not about the data on the resilience, but it's about the stories of your business is at risk at the moment from lots of different things. The risk, if you're running a hospitality business, say a pizza company, you're reliant on three things. It's wheat, cheese and tomatoes. If you can't get those things, you can't serve pizzas. So your business is at massive risk of climate impacting your food supply. So I'm finding that resilience narrative cutting through more than a reduce your emissions narrative, because there's a business driver that a boardroom's taking much more seriously than a moral driver, but that, of course, we all in this room recognise is important. So I don't know if that's a question.
Yeah, I think two thoughts. One is, I guess, if you're saying sort of, yeah, resilience is a motivating driver, I suppose what I'm taking from that as well is that the commercial link, whether that's via resilience or via another means is becoming more powerful. I'd agree with that. So are they perhaps less bought in from a this feels good perspective? Yes. But I think we have been able to, or are actively trying to use multiple commercial narratives to try and have that be the kind of, to reposition this as not something that's costly. Whether, we've probably got 4 or 5 ways into talking about it. Resilience is one of them, as is, preparing early for legislation so that we don't have to drop everything to, So there's a few different ways in for it. I think what I mean by it, and maybe that sounds like you can help me with this, so let's have a chat after. But I think what I mean when I say is the resilience is not yet a driver for change, is that it's like, it's a compelling narrative overall, but in terms of, are we acting as a result of that across the industry right now? Not yet, but I'd love to find ways to accelerate that change.
Bob, just to come back to you on that point, without sort of very specific intelligence insight on what those risks mean for specific commodities in terms of availability, in terms of price, data essentially, are these narratives not just too abstract to actually, persuade leaders to, start affecting change? Do we not need narratives and data at the same time? Surely narratives alone have never really carried much weight in the boardroom, have they?
And that's why I was kind of reflecting on it, even as I was saying it. Is you're right, the boardroom makes decisions in a very different way to the voting public, right? So it needs to be a story that's backed up by data. I guess the question or the thought was really around data that supports what? Because I think the more powerful, I love what you're saying, it's not just resilience, it's finding a commercial reason to deal with this. But I know of, and suspect it's not in isolated cases, that there are companies who, for example, sign up to SBTI because they know the question they're going to get asked from their customer is, have you signed up to SBTI? They have no intention of doing anything about it. They've signed up to SBTI to win a commercial contract to stay in business, not because they genuinely believe in doing the right thing to get into net zero. So it's a challenge of commerciality and commerciality of language rather than boardroom action on decarbonisation, because I question that motivation.
Okay. Thank you. But yes, Andrea.
Zooming out quite a bit, thinking macro level, who are the players you are seeing who are helping to bring awareness to the data and the understanding of the data on societal level? Because there is a little bit of a tension here. It's great if there's a handful of people understanding the data, but really what we want is that, in essence, everyone gets it, right? Then we are all pushing forward. And my question is really, who's doing great work on macro level, telling the public and ultimately the board of directors that this matters? If you can think of anyone.
Yeah. I think, I think 2 thoughts. One is that obviously widespread carbon labelling would start to drive an awareness of which ingredients have a higher carbon footprint. Until that's present, I guess it feels like, because I suppose that would be the repetitive drumbeat as well of being able to communicate it. I know loads of businesses are trialing on it, working at it on a small scale, nervous to do it because they haven't got primary data or haven't got like the right level of accuracy or can't do it across the whole store. It feels there like a bit of a wider industry push towards it would be good. Equally, we've tried it. It was positive in terms of customers were like, this is nice. Didn't actually drive action though as a result. So yeah, the case short term isn't very compelling. Oh, and then my other thought, and I'm glad that my partner's not watching this, but Clarkson's Farm. Like, I think in terms of the audience that that's reaching and starting to introduce some of these narratives around different methods of farming. I know you can pick loads of holes with loads and loads and loads of it, but it's got some members of my family talking about it that just absolutely weren't a few years ago. So I'll take that.
Just before we go back to you, Mike, I just wanted to ask you, Andy, given your role, how important you found it to be able to evidence the impact of interventions you're making within the business across various functions in order to gain that sort of and sustain traction within the business.
It's really important, especially from the energy point of view and decarbonisation around asset replacements, for example, we need to demonstrate, because a lot of these decisions are made based on a payback or return on investment. So it's good to be able to reference, you know, an external methodology like IPMVP, for example, if we're doing measurements and verification, and also to sort of validate the activity. It's all very well saying we'll draw, we'll do this, here's what we've saved, but we're also seeing a lot of time, we've got return to offices, people are trying to increase their consumption in their offices. So we need to sometimes be demonstrating that standing still with your energy consumption is a good thing, because if you weren't doing proactive activity to reduce consumption, your cost, your emissions would be increasing. And it's how we have that narrative through the data to be able to show the activity is having a benefit, but maybe other activity taking place that is counterintuitive, and you might not be seeing it reflected in your bills, but the impact of not taking the action would have meant that your spend was so much greater. Similar with decarbonisation, it reduces your carbon emissions, but usually you're transferring from gas to electricity, which is more expensive, pence per kilowatt hour unit rate. So it does have a negative impact, and it's framing that conversation and engaging with the right stakeholders. If it isn't us directly having the conversation with senior leadership, but they're able to take that message and say, this money is being spent for replacing aged assets with new assets, which is a benefit, removing carbon, replacing it with, you know, cleaner technology, but there is a payoff for that, but the benefit is so much greater in the long term.
Thank you, Nick. I was just going to reflect on what you said, Meredith, about the about Clarkson's Farms, and actually reflect on what we've all said. What you've all said so far is about stories. You know, telling someone that there's telling a member of the public that there's 345 grams of CO2 equivalent means nothing, but actually when it relates to something like a Clarkson's Farm, or I mean, I know that, you know, when Clarkson's Farm first started, farmers hated it, but now they love it because actually it's told that story. And then introducing people like Andy Cato onto Clarkson's Farm was amazing, because no one had ever even heard of that now. Yeah. So yeah, anyway, just a reflection.
Just Meredith, coming back to Anya's point around the need to focus on the areas of greatest impact within the business, does that sort of reflect the approach you're taking and will continue to take as, you know, the quality of your data evolves? Because you've got such, you know, working across such a broad range of brands, broad range of commodities. Have you been able to kind of zero in on what are the most impactful changes you can make within your entire supply chain that will drive carbon reduction?
Yeah, definitely. I think we might have a less neat kind of bunching at the top of the tail because of that brand portfolio approach. But what we have done is mapped it by brand, and yeah, we were dithering for quite a long time on how to cut it to then prioritize, but by brand is how the decisions are being made. So it made sense to do that, and found that 4 brands are responsible for 87% of our emissions. So that's great. We focused almost exclusively on them. It's, you know, it's your upper crust, it's the bars where you can get a burger in the airport, those kind of venues. And then, yeah, from a product perspective, yeah, there's a lot of burgers, arguably, and a lot of all-day breakfasts. So we've done quite a lot of work there and continue to do lots in that space, unsurprisingly, I guess. I would also marry that as well with like that we have had some success that I was skeptical of almost like a few other flagship products that are talkable or are quite interesting. And the teams have been able to really get behind them. So whilst they might not have the biggest carbon impact, so initially I was like, don't waste the time with that. They have generated a really positive story, and I've got people talking about it in a more interesting way. So I've got a little bit of space in my heart for those two.
And just specifically on the menu/offer decarbonisation, what are the biggest drivers for that work? Is it meeting internal climate targets? Is it consumer demand? Is it pressure, as was alluded to earlier, from customers, franchise partners, for example? Where is that push coming from predominantly, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's ostensibly our net zero target, which is ambitious. And then I suppose being able to communicate progress against that to both our investors and our clients. I think then in practice, it's sort of the profile benefits that can come from working on sustainability. So yeah, I don't know about other businesses, but it feels like sustainability gets quite a big share of voice at like all company events, for example, which is then such a good platform to be able to spotlight the brilliant work that individual team members are doing. So yeah, a lot of my work has been, okay, how can working on sustainability a little bit more proactively than kind of the baseline, make you famous internally, which is obviously good for people's career. So I've quite shamelessly used that as a lever to try and make it a more appealing work stream to make time for.
Anya, did you want to come in on that based on your experiences of working with lots of different businesses in terms of the motivating factors for menu decarbonisation, or decarbonisation of purchased goods, which is clearly a huge part of Scope 3 emissions for most businesses. What are the key drivers of that in your experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. Before I answer that, I just wanted to pick up on something Bob said, which is about kind of how in the last year we've seen this obviously bigger political and kind of societal challenge around sustainability, which I think can be really tough to deal with kind of in the roles that we're all in. But I do think that in the longer term, looking to kind of 2050 and beyond, like we have to be realistic about the kind of economic and political systems that we have that are always in flux. And so we're going to go through cost of living crises and massive economic crises and then boom and, all of that kind of flow. And so I don't know if we really have crystallized the answers yet about how we continue to keep sustainability going through these kind of tougher times. But I think what we come out with in the next couple of years is going to be the thing that will allow us to get through the future challenges that just will keep coming, because that's how this will look for the next couple of decades. So yeah, hopefully we can get to a point where we crystallize those and then are more resilient for the next wave of challenges. But with that in mind, I do think that we've seen those kind of drivers really change a lot over the last couple of years. And as many people here will have experienced it, very much went from that kind of hate the term virtue signaling, but much more of that kind of external, like look at us, kind of let's put our head above the parapet and gain some recognition from a kind of brand or whatever perspective, through to, I guess, that not holding as much weight as some of the headwinds around cost and kind of actually maybe even like a political cost in some instances, particularly in the US, around actually doing that kind of signaling piece. So now I would say, some of the drivers that we're talking about a lot more than before are competition. That didn't really come up much initially, but I think to your point, in some instances, it's like, well, if you have two businesses that are, nearly identical on cost, offering blah, 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 and one can also do sustainability, then that is just another attribute that becomes a competitive advantage. And I think we've seen that as a much bigger driver for the work than previously. And then otherwise, I guess probably cost as well. So some instances where there are those win-wins have been bigger drivers but I think it's tougher. It's not as holistic, I guess, as it was before when people were talking about let's do this from a brand and sort of bigger message perspective.
Great. Any final questions, Max?
Yeah, hi. Question for Andrew and Meredith about boardroom and their focus on scope 1 and 2, perhaps. Are you seeing in your outlets and your contracts that you're being asked to make reductions in electricity? And are you being charged for that electricity or gas that you're using? Because that can be a significant proportion of the footprint of your business at the same time as the business that you're contracting out to. So are you seeing that discussion happening about reductions of energy as part of the contract and being charged for that energy as part of the contract, so that there's an incentive for you to make those changes?
So we're proactively, offering to our client base where some of our contracts may have already been running for a number of years, going in and offering the services that we are, developing as an organisation for ISS and, recruiting accordingly to go and offer this proactively as a service that might not have been originally in scope 3-5 years ago when some of these contracts were signed, to go and support our customers with actually just delivering and resourcing through, energy managers on site, going actually making the changes to engaging with customers. I was on a site yesterday where they had the air conditioning on, they had the windows open, and it's sort of, you walk in, you spot it straight away, and it's like, this is really easy engagement, but it needs to be done. If it isn't being done, if people aren't aware of it, people don't know that it has a bad negative impact. And it's as simple as from that to heat networks, and as complex or as simple as you like, but it's that thing that if you take your eye off it, it stops happening people's day jobs take over, and it's having that focus to actually, it's somebody's job to go and do this. It isn't something else that somebody has to do as part of their job. That's what we're finding.
Yeah, I would say kind of almost. So yes, often charge us. Often our model is that we'll have like a pass-through model. So yeah, we'll just be billed for the energy that we use. So obviously there's a motivating factor there to reduce. We are definitely increasingly being asked for data, so they have to make less assumptions. And then I'd say the mechanism of change that we're seeing at the moment is from some clients starting to ask us to sign like a sustainability pledge, for example, where we will kind of commit. Mostly these aren't hard targets at this point. It's a broad intent to do X, Y, Z. It won't just be energy. It will be, on waste, etc., other things. But I suppose probably my reflection is that, they're not yet coming through in the commercial conversations that shape the contract. It will be the sustainability team that's reaching out and sharing that. So maybe at the next contract renewal, those two will come together.
Super. Well, we've covered a lot of ground there. Thank you very much to the panel for your candour in answering some pretty challenging questions. You can return to your seats and take a breather. Thank you. And we move on now to our second keynote presentation, and I'm very pleased to welcome Claire Atkins-Moritz. Claire, as I'm sure most of you know, is Sustainability Director at Sodexo, and she's going to talk to us about delivering a net zero supply chain engagement strategy, fused with a bit of cultural change as well, I think. Keynote fusion. So over to you, Claire. You okay with that?
No, I don't want to stand behind this. No one can see me. Can I have a mic, please?
I think if you grab one, that should work.
I'll be like, is anyone hear me? I should have worn heels, but trainers are more comfy. If you give me a mic, I might sing. That's the only problem. So I'm not very good at standing. It's just too restrictive. I don't like it. Yeah, so I'm Claire Atkins-Moritz. I think a lot of you I've already met in the room. So I'm the Director of Sustainability in Sodexo, and I've been voluntold for this panel speak because Footprint put me up for an award, and they were like, because of that, you're now going to do this. And I was like, thank you very much. So be careful what awards you do win. As Nick said, I'll storm through, but if you do have quizzes, because it's lively, and I love Footprint because you create such an environment where no question is silly, and we get Bob out there, stories, reform. We've had Clarkson's farm so far, tomato, clamato, who cares, right? So let's go for it. There we go. Okay, so I've shoved this up. Because this is our social impact pledge and it aligns with our business strategy. But why am I sharing this with you? And this goes back to the bridge of culture. So it's about making it embedded in everything that we do, but also making it accessible to the market that we work in. And, the guys here, whether you're ISS, whether you're WSH, or whether you're, I feel like I nearly saw then, or Compass, we're working in an environment which is totally complex. No other environment gives you such accessibility to so many different sectors, so many different spaces in terms of sustainability. So you need a framework to be able to craft that. And we found the Social Impact Pledge gives us that. So you can see there's 4 impact pathways there: people, planet, places, partners. And you can see underneath what we're aiming to achieve. We talked about simplification this morning. This is as simple as we can make it. Underneath every single one of those pathways is a massive amount of KPIs, but it depends on your consumer, your messaging, your market to decide what story you tell within that. Why is she gonna put an iceberg in the middle of all those lovely slides? So I am a trained life coach, and it's been really useful for me as part of sustainability because often I'm asking people to do something different every day. And people don't really like change. We have to go through either the Kotler's 8 steps, you may know that, or the change house. Where are we? We're in the sun. You're so going to look this up. Are you in the sun lounger today? Are you in the pit of denial? But it's really important because we are dealing with humans, and with stories that are either factually correct or incorrect, we're still dealing with people, and sustainability is just so emotive. So when we talk to the board, yes, data is in there, but this is fundamental. You've got the stuff that's visible, I'm just going to wave my arm and hope I'm pointing the right place, right? There's stuff that's visible, so it's your mission, it's your strategy, it's the stuff you put out. This is who we are, right? And then there's the invisible stuff. It's like how you talk to each other, whether it's a little bit of a blame culture going on. Who does chair races in the office? That's always me. I'm really grateful that my organisation thinks that chair races is fine, and I get everybody to join in. So I feel very authentically accepted in my organisation. But that's culture again. But that's not the same for everyone in my organisation. So what is it? I think it's probably because I don't care what they're going to say to me. I think that goes back to being a disruptor in this market, because you're so used to people saying, no, you can't do that. So you just end up being very resilient individuals, because it might be a maybe tomorrow, and then the day after, I reckon it could even be a yes. And you take that. Little wins. And I talk to my organisation, we're never doing enough. It doesn't feel enough. We need to do more. And then I turn around and go, look at everything that you've done. Like, don't forget about all of that. And yes, it wasn't linear, going back to your point. It was really tough. And yes, there's loads to do, but we've done it before, so we can learn from that. So the reason why I stuck the culture piece up is don't ever forget this piece. And stories underpinned by data is fundamental. Like, we were even talking about locusts this morning today, weren't we? We were talking about Jurassic Park. We were just going, I watched a film on Jurassic Park and they had locusts. And then I was like, because they had locusts in there, I don't know where my brain's going here, but it was talking about food systems and food security, but that's in Jurassic Park 3. I'm not going to do any spoiler alert, but even so, we're at Clarkson Farm and now we've got Jurassic Park in here. I'll put this slide up for Bob. There you go, Bob. So we've got SBTI targets for short-term, near-term, and long-term, and we've got flag targets as well. And sometimes I am worried about those targets because they're big. And like, when you sign up to them, you sign up with the best. Like, you've totally got this right. But we might not have it completely. And that's also okay. So the other acronym I use is called VUCA. So it's about being able to navigate a volatile, uncertain, ambiguous market. And this is what it's in at the moment. And again, I think everyone thinks that your progress is going to be linear, and you put out your progress reports and hope it'll be like that lovely curve. Oh, look at this. I'm going the wrong way, there we go. But it doesn't. It goes up and down. And some of that's because of data. Like, our methodology changes all the time. We restate our data all the time. And trying to explain that to people, they're just looking at me like, but we don't do that for finances. And you're like, yeah, but we've been doing that for a long, long time. And this is new stuff, right? And my CEO was like, you can't hide behind the methodology, Claire. And I was like, I bloody well can, because that's what's changed this. So, Bob, this is for you. But in all seriousness, lots of commitments sit behind this, a shed load of data. It's a lot there. I'm just going to leave the cabbage slide with you. Yeah, all my slides have names. This is the swirly slide. Because everyone knows then, I always go, can I have the swirly slide in the deck, please? And they know. It's just perfect. So this is our footprint, which is a little bit surprising because supply chain isn't the biggest bit. So we've got scope 1 and 2, which is small, but we all know that. Scope 3 is the big bit. But look, I've got 49% in client-side energy, and scope 3 is 38%. So we've already talked about energy this morning, and delivering our services on our client site is a big part of our scope 3. Well, we're focusing on that, but we're also focusing on supply chain. We are focusing on scope 1 and 2, but it's not as materially important to us. And that's what the data says. This is the mountain slide. It's got commentary and everything, but lots of lovely commitments there. And you put it in a really simple way. This is how we're going to get to net zero, etc. But sitting behind this is a tool called the Carbon Trajectory Tool. And it was built 4 years ago. I'm really pleased the people did build that, because that's when I joined this role. So then they made me look good, which is good. But fundamentally, it takes all of our data and then it allows scenario analysis. So all the different levers I can do this with and different timeframes and different cost envelopes, and it gives me a transition plan. Who knew? Who knew we had this tool? So now we're trying to like convince others that to use this tool as well, because it's all underpinned by data. So if we don't meet some of these commitments, we can go back to the carbon trajectory tool and replay the numbers. And so we've got it for the UK, we have it for Ireland, and we have it across all the other 53 regions that we operate in. So it's given us, I call it the Financial Times put out a game when you were able to do how to get to net zero. And I call the tool that Financial Times game because it gives you just the ability to, well, I play with it. My team get annoyed with me because they're like, have you then saved your play? And I was like, I might have done. And then I've skewed the whole transition plan. So they give me the demo version now. That's where I've got to. I'm not allowed to play with it anymore. But yeah, there's lots in there. And this is all based on data for helping us to get to net zero. So we've got the supply chain piece coming after us. So what are we doing around this? So we've already identified like a large part of our scope 3 is supply chain. And we decided to go a little bit tense, I suppose. Well, we weren't going tense. So Max, you're in here. So NHS England, you went out with a evergreen framework. You were really clear with your supply chain. All we did was just follow on your coattails, really, and went, that's a good idea. The NHS has got a lot of suppliers, more than us. They're being asked for this data, so we'll just ask for it the same way. And then I spoke to my global CPO and just said, when we get to 2030, though, can we sort of say, like, maybe we won't work with some suppliers if they don't do published tangible reporting? And he's like, yeah, you got my sign off. And I was like, so that's a win that day, right? I did have my CEO and founder of the organisation phone me when the news reports came out. Thanks, Footprint. And she was like, "Are you sure about this?" And we were like, "Yes, it's all been signed off." But fundamentally, in 2030 is not that far away. We've set key milestones with our supply partners. We've based it on emissions. So again, going back to Anya's view, don't go for all your suppliers. Go for the ones that make a big impact. And funny enough, we've got butchers in there that are SMEs right at the beginning. And what we've put in there, we've talked about granting grace periods. So we have grace periods, but we've also put a mentoring program in place. So we didn't want to just go, see ya, hope you'll be all right with that. We've kind of gone, what support do you need to all our supply partners? We were kind of thinking they might want HR, food safety, but they were like, we need net zero support. We're being asked a lot these days for where are we on our commitments. And so we said, right, fine, we'll set up a mentoring program. We've got a number of our SMEs supporting, but we also have our clients leaning in now because we gave them a framework to say, if you want to get to your tier 2, this is an easy way to do this. So now they're mentoring our supply partners, but also their supply partners by one, if that makes sense. So we've met 2 so far. They were the easy steps, right? You can see number 3 around SBTI. So again, we talked about it. We do sign up with a lot of ESG clauses through our commercial agreements that we will be either SBTI or we will be within 1 year of getting the contract. So already we're like, thank God for that. Big tick. And my role is just to make the sellers look good, right? So I want them to rock up and go, we totally got this. Claire's done it all. I haven't. The business has, but I'll take the glory. Tick, tick, tick. Make sure that we can get through the door. And we are seeing our clients being much more proactive in this space. But we are also seeking clients that are very similar to us as well, because it's a much easier conversation. We all know how difficult it is. And then you're talking to organisations and they're like, we're struggling with this. We're struggling with this too. What is it that we can do to make it work? And I spoke to one of the sustainability leads this morning. She's like, sustainability is such a leveler. We can just have a normal conversation, right? And then once we've had like a conversation, we can then bring in our commercial guys and have a conversation. Guys as in guys, non-binary guys, okay, just so we're clear. But But yeah, SBTI will be tough, I think. But 92.9% of our supply chain are already on board. We're using the carbon reduction plans that are already out there. So, yeah, have a look. And it has created tangible progress. Oh, there we go. So progress to date. And this is based on activity based. So 31.8% reduction in supply chain emissions. I can't attribute that completely to the net zero engagement strategy, but there's lots in there that we can. But there's much to do. But at least we're going in the right way, right? That's what we're hoping. That's what we're all here to do. So hopefully that's my 15 minutes up, because I was never checking time. And hopefully that met the brief. Charlie? Okay, good.
Take the microphone. Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much. That was terrific. I was panicking about 2/3 of the way through that the title was completely obsolete to the keynote, but the supply chain engagement strategy came good towards the end. So thank you for that. Claire, just while you, sorry, I hate to throw this at you while you're settling, but just to be clear, you've got this big target coming up in September 2025, 75% target. You alluded towards the end that 92% of suppliers are now, so you've exceeded that already quite comfortably.
So 92% are engaged,
Right.
Okay. 92% are engaged with the strategy, so they've done the milestone 1 to 2, and then we'll recalibrate when we get to September in terms of where we are for milestone 3. But if we don't, this is the thing, if you don't meet the target, I'm not going to lose any sleep. I'm going to report on that transparently and then work to what we can get to, because some of this is outside of our control. And we don't always have the best leverage. I think there's always this optic that we have significant leverage, but behind the retailers, we absolutely do not.
Great. Well, Claire is going to stay with us for this panel session, and can I invite Mike and Charlotte to come up, please, and join Claire. So the focus on this session is a bit more sort of practical. What are some of the practical ways in which data can help drive decarbonisation on the ground? And we've got some examples up there: chefs, buyers, suppliers, of course, as Claire has already touched upon. But again, as with the first panel, Lottie, can I ask you perhaps just to explain to those who might not be familiar with Appetito what it is you do?
Yep, so Appetito are a frozen meal provider. We provide meals through the B2B to hospitals, care homes and education settings, and then have a direct customer business called Wiltshire Farm Foods. So most people tend to have heard of Wiltshire Farm Foods, but not Appetito, but we're all one, essentially.
Thank you. And Mike?
Yeah, WSH is the parent company of 18 different hospitality brands in the UK and in Northern Europe. So we've got Baxter Story, Benugo, CSEs, Caterlink, etc. And then we've got some business in Northern Europe, mainly in Paris, Denmark, Belgium, Netherlands and Norway. So predominantly catering in the workplace or school. So what we would have many years ago called contract catering.
Super. Lottie, I'm going to come to you first, if I may. What do you see as some of the main operational levers that Appetito can pull to deliver decarbonisation on the ground?
Yeah, I think in terms of an operational lever, I think it's really important to make sure that that strategy is clear. It's a really easy starting point to make sure that everybody actually understands what you're trying to achieve and can therefore buy into it. So before you even kind of get into the little bits you can push and pull, having that understanding and that clarity of message at the beginning is really, really important to start that work. And we've touched quite a lot on kind of how stories can play a really important part. And I think getting that why across with your team, why do we even kind of bother to do this, can really then start to create that emotive connection with it. And then you can pull at those levers. So almost take the step prior to the levers to get that first stage of messaging right.
Mike, in terms of some of the practical actions that you're taking within the business to drive decarbonisation and the role of data within that. I know you come from a chef's background, and WSH as a business is really big on chef training and developing plant-forward, shall we call them, menus. So can you talk a little bit about what that means in terms of decarbonisation and how you're using data to drive menu reformulation and drive down emissions?
Yeah, sure. I think the most important thing is engaging with our teams, is upskilling. It's a bit of a cliche now, but trying to make every job a green job, getting that level of literacy up to the front. We talked about we use Nutritics, and it's been recognised earlier that actually carbon labelling in terms of a customer frontage doesn't really move the dial. But what it does do, and it's brilliant for, is actually driving behaviours behind the scenes, actually allowing our chefs and our managers who create their own recipes, because we're a very decentralised business, so we empower the front end to create their own menus and their own recipes, etc. But they need to be able to do that. They need that knowledge. They need to understand how they can drive that, how they can make a blended burger and see the impact of that in terms of the carbon footprint of that. And I think that's absolutely critical. So I'd say upskilling and sharing that knowledge, and stories work. And the other thing we're doing is customers want to know what's in it for them. So actually, one thing that we want to make sure that our customers trust us in, that we've got them on this. And we get them from a carbon perspective, an environmentally responsible perspective, but also from sustainable nutrition. So actually looking at the nutritional health benefits, and the two combined are an absolute winner. So when you're having a conversation about that, but the customer, as I said, the customer doesn't want to know how, and I've said it millions of times, but the customer doesn't want to know how the sausage is made. They just want to know, actually, you know what, I will make a choice based on that. It's an amazing looking bit of food. It's the right price, I'll have it. Not based on that it's 345 grams of CO2 or it's got this amount of water. They also want to go, you know what we want to do is know that this business that we're now buying from, they've got us on this.
Okay. Just on, and Claire and Lottie, feel free to come in on this, but those who read our recent report with Foodsteps will have kind of seen how chefs as agents of change was quite a big theme within that. But I'm interested in the extent to which chef engagement with carbon reduction has been easy, or whether it's actually been quite challenging. I mean, as chefs, they are creative creatures at heart, and is there any sense that adding this layer of bureaucracy through environmental data has met with any resistance from chefs, or has it largely been positive?
Do you want me to go?
Yeah.
So we deployed, I'll do a story. So we deployed a food waste technology called WasteWatch many years ago. And for whatever reason, it just wasn't accepted by the chef community. And it was really, really frustrating. And then when we started unpicking it, we had sold it as a process. We want you to do this process. And what we hadn't done was share what's important about it and how they're such an integral part of it, and for them to be proud of it. So then when we brought the culinary professional family, we reset. And because of that, we went from, so the commitment was 50% reduction of food waste by 2025. We were currently sitting at something like 30%, and our revolving credit facility was next to it, and we were all starting to panic. We're now at 49.3%. And that's purely because we told a story, and we also, it didn't come from sustainability. It's owned by the culinary professional family. They own it, they deploy it, they adopt it, they do the impact. I just take, again, it goes back to I take the glory sometimes, you know, and that's where we've moved forwards. And it's the same with the low carbon meals. So you would have seen in the transition plan, low carbon meals by 70% by 2030. It's owned by the culinary professional family. They've gone through all of their recipes. They've also got, they're really, they amaze me all the time. But the commercials that sit behind it, they're really savvy to that. So one product might be particularly expensive this week. let's swap it out, let's put something else in. And it's not purely driven by sustainability. Our consumers here, they don't like whatever bean it is, so they've swapped out another bean. So, and the data and the systems are now empowering them, but we had to sell them the story, and then they own it and they're empowered by it. Whereas, yeah, we definitely learned from our mistakes.
Lottie, do you want to share your experience of working in the NHS? Because I know you've got an
Yeah.
example, haven't you, on carbon reduction?
Yeah, so I'm going to come in slightly from the other end. So we obviously provide a kind of finished product ready to be regenerated to hospitals, care homes, and education settings. So our kind of involvement with the chef is slightly different in that sense because the food's already been made. So we focus quite heavily on kind of how we can work on the menu itself and actually produce kind of reduced carbon menus in that space. But we've also had to be really sensitive to the fact that if we're serving into the NHS, nutrition plays a really important part. Cost also plays a really important part, and choice is incredibly important. Like you said, if you're putting a bean on and somebody doesn't know what that is, they're not going to go for it. So you need to make sure you're balancing kind of the choice aspect as well. So we kind of started this process of producing reduced carbon menus, and this was working with our customers to look at the carbon footprint of their original meal offering and menu, and then working with them to make small switches in that menu to reduce emissions. And here we heavily focused on going from kind of red meat options to white meat and kind of fish and vegan and vegetarian. But the idea was to make that transition gradual, to not kind of jump from one extreme to another, because that's where we thought choice might get compromised, but to make a gradual transition. And by doing that, the kind of pilot site we did it with, we actually saw a 10% carbon reduction by those small changes. That has then spread across particularly our healthcare setting. And as a business unit overall, the whole healthcare business unit has seen a 10% carbon reduction just by making those really small changes and not kind of scaring everybody into a significant change.
Just picking up that point, Lottie, on nutrition, which is obviously so critical in a hospital setting. You've got, I guess, essentially, two critical sets of data there, nutrition data and environmental data. And I wonder to what extent they overlap when it comes to developing new recipes that are both nutritious and lower carbon. And where they don't overlap, does nutrition always win out? And do you have to kind of pull back a bit from the carbon agenda?
Yeah, so the reduced carbon menu model, the data was pulling the carbon data and the nutritional data. So any change always mapped out the impact on nutrition to make sure we weren't compromising that. Because ultimately we want patients to be kind of fed to the best of their possibility. They're in a kind of recovery period, and therefore it's really important that we make sure they get the nutrition that they need. So ultimately nutrition does win, and I think at this point it will, but it's finding more ways in which we can have nutrition win but also have carbon win and sustainability win.
Okay, great. I'll open up to any questions shortly. Well, go on then, the gentleman at the back, far away.
It's been quite interesting to listen to you all. 70% roughly of the carbon footprint from food services industry is in agriculture. But we haven't really talked about we've talked about Clarkson's farm, but he might be doing some very sustainable things, but that's because he can afford to do it. No one's really paid farmers the full value of what they should be doing, and quite frankly, very few people have got the data to actually validate that, and where they do, it's on a project by project basis rather than at scale. So it'd be interesting to hear because when you were talking earlier, that you kind of got to the butcher, but before the butcher, there's a whole beef processing industry and farmers who are producing that beef.
I am really worried about animal proteins because, again, if you look at the data says purely from binary, beef, lamb, we shouldn't be selling them from a carbon perspective. But from a non-binary perspective, you have to look at actually what are I can see James's face, I'm sorry. I'll come into it. But what are there's cultural, so lots of people like, let's make a swap out to pork. But actually, again, from a cultural perspective, pork isn't often chosen significantly within the UK. France, interestingly, they are very high pork eaters. We've also seen quite a lot of males between a particular age really increase their protein amount, because again, from the disinformation probably on TikTok saying you're going to the gym, you want to be healthy, you need to eat animal protein. So this whole protein debate is just going, I can feel it going on and on, it's bobbling. All the while you've got organisations such as mine with the data that we've got to the best of our ability. And actually, we need to be able to really push that data far more, because there are amazing practices taking place at farm level that we haven't got the ability to take that data and apply it to our systems and then compare. And then you've got the whole piece around welfare. Like, you would go to a beef farmer and the welfare that they're doing is far greater than some of the chicken farmers. And we've got all this challenge, which makes it totally complex. The data doesn't help us at all. So then that's where we have to come together to go, what is the right thing? Because we're going to have to face into this, because some of us are not going to meet our near-term target unless we really start thinking about an animal protein strategy as what's the word? Sector. Thank you. I just had to look at him and I found it. I don't think it gives you the answers, because I agree, we're doing lots of projects and lots of trials, and we're starting to sort of do like incentives and things like that. But that's really starting at the beginning. It's not systemic.
Can I just invite James to come in there, Bob, because I know you're itching to respond to the point around beef.
James Evans, grassroots farmers. So we run a beef supply chain, and we've given this from a fresh pair of eyes from a farmer's point of view into the hospitality industry. And yes, our beef is more expensive, but it runs about 10% more expensive. But we've proved that it's 50% less carbon. And probably what we see as our biggest challenge is, we can speak to sustainability leads, and great, we love it, brilliant. 10%, that's not too much. But with the pressures, on everyone at the moment, and especially procurement teams, that's where seems to be the challenge to embrace this. And who wins within the companies? It's sustainability, it's procurement trying to drive their targets, and we're thinking, well, does it need to come from a different pot? We're trying to put carbon reduction on the price of beef, and that's a really challenge, especially with the beef price being at the moment. And do we need to try and think differently about how large companies like you're all operating in incentivise decarbonisation?
Does anyone want to respond to that? Mike, do you want to have a crack before?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing some work with grassroots on a similar vein on the sort of the wheat and oats system on wild farms, which are this sort of similar type of setup. And I think the key is collaboration, and the key is actually working together. And actually, and Lottie, you mentioned the push and the pull. It's a two-way street. It can't be just a one-way street, because actually we all need to achieve the same thing. We all want to achieve the same thing. We all need to work together to understand that. And something else that I know that James is working on, and we're working on with them too, is whole carcass. So actually, it's looking at the whole carcass and trying to find a way that we can divvy that up across our businesses in different ways and different formats to actually make it more efficient, rather than just going for prime cuts. So it's not just a carbon perspective; it's a sort of an efficiency perspective as well, and then that helps drive down the price. So actually, and we need to get to a point of critical mass as well. So we can work with James and Alistair at scale, and then the prices start to come down, and we start to work towards our near-term and ultimately net zero targets.
Mm. And just reflecting on your point, James, I think we're conscious of the fact that in framing this discussion around the role of data in driving decarbonisation, we are at risk of sidelining those other key environmental indicators that may point in a slightly different direction, although we know that there's quite a generally quite a good crossover between low carbon and other sustainability indicators. It's not always the case. And I wonder whether our business is set up to deal with the complexity of bringing in another, a range of indicators into the mix. No.
Have you heard of CSRD?
I have, yes.
Okay,
yes.
so that I don't think anyone of us is ready, and we'll be reporting because we reside in France. So our head office is in France. We'll be reporting this year in November. I don't know how many auditors I've got coming to London who have never audited CSRD before. So I am a little bit, I'm going to pee my pants a little bit, but it'll be fine. I'm going to be coffee lady. That's going to be my role on the day. Honestly, I'm not allowed near this data stuff. They don't let me. But yeah, so with the CSRD, so Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive is going to be is a game changer. We have 500 additional narrative or number KPIs in addition to what we already report on, and that's so that'll be fun. I think it's going to be fun. That's what I'm saying to myself. But fundamentally, what it will do is will accelerate our data and our systems, because we are not set up to be able to report at that level and for it to be live. And we need to use it as a differentiator, because I don't know when you're doing yet, but some of our competitors, because of their entity state, won't be doing it until 2027.
Yeah, it's interesting. My colleague Alex up there has been doing most of this. But it's going to be like the blind leading the blind, because they don't really know what they're auditing. We don't know what they want. And actually, it's going to take a few cycles to actually get to a point actually where we all know what we're doing. And I found when we have an audit, if you get asked an awkward question, try and steer them towards having a coffee or something.
Good. I'll take that tip. Thank you. But I think it goes back to this, like, are we ready? Like, and someone mentioned TCFD. Well, we've got TCFD, which is going to be evolving. You've got CSRD. You've got a lot of everybody looking at everybody going, has anybody got this? All the while trying to build in all the other things that we want to be doing. So it goes back to priorities. And sometimes, we have to make a decision and go, we want to do all of this, but this is all that we can do. And again, goes back to annual business planning, annual budgets alongside our 3 to 5 year plan. And just make decisions every year and be ready. I think my word is, who's ready to pivot? Because that's what we have to do.
Bob, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I wanted to come back to the point, Claire, you made about sectoral change and looking at some of the numbers you had up there about some really significant reductions in emissions from food. Lottie, you spoke about your decarbonisation menu. Mike, I know you're doing loads of stuff. Reminded of one of our members, pub company, who's done a trial in one of their brands, reduced the emissions of the menu by more than 25% without their customers even knowing they've made changes. Blended burgers, change of language, changing order on the menu. And I'm reminded I was working with the retailers back in about 2010 when they were trying to remove salt from ready meals. And none of them could do it in isolation. They'd all tried, but actually what needed to happen was everybody needed to commit to a gradual change, and then the customer's palate would change. Do we have a similar kind of challenge here where we need everybody to act a little bit and the customer's palate and this expectation of meat protein is going to change at the same time as changing the way we produce it, so we're reducing the emissions per kilo that we're eating? But we need it to be a wider cultural sectoral change.
Just quickly on that, I think, but to a degree, I think we're already doing that, because we're such a collaborative sector.
So collaborative.
In comparison, and we had a zero carbon forum all members meeting last week, and one of the previous members had come back, and she now works for Sainsbury's, and we're talking about. She was saying that the retail sector, they just do not collaborate. There is no discussion. There's no shared information, and we've got an amazing, within the forum. We've got McDonald's and Burger King talking to each other on the beef working group. And that's incredible. And that's what's going to drive it. And that's what's, just to tip my hat to everyone in this room and everyone in the sector, is that it is an incredibly collaborative, and it's a very, very overused word, but we do work together for the common good, and I do believe that.
It doesn't mean there's still competition within there. But,
no, absolutely.
All right, I'm talking now. Look at this. But it goes back to, like, there's some stuff that is like pre-competition. So there'll always be stuff where Mike and I will like literally just not be in the same room as each other. But then there'll be a load of stuff where actually, yeah, I don't really care whether it's competitive or not. You know, this stuff needs to progress forward. So, you know, I think sometimes some organisations just go, don't look them in the eye, don't look them in the eye. But fundamentally, we see each other quite a lot because we're in a similar space, and it's useful because actually it goes back to Bob, your point. If we are talking to lots of different consumers and they're feeling the same messages, and then all of a sudden it's called momentum. But it's never, for me, it's never quick enough. But that's part of my probably psyche anyway.
I'd just like to come back to a point that came up in the first panel around the customer pull towards decarbonisation. And I wonder, is having a credible decarbonisation plan backed by robust data increasingly seen as a source of competitive advantage in the marketplace? And Lottie, perhaps, you know, you can speak to this from a public sector perspective as well, because I know there are certain requirements that suppliers to the public sector have to meet, but are you increasingly seeing it as a point of difference when you're competing for contracts?
Yeah, without a doubt. From a public sector perspective, 100%. I think healthcare probably more than some of our other business areas at the moment. And you're increasingly seeing it feature in kind of tenders as a really core area. Obviously, you touched on Evergreen earlier as an example of something we've had to complete as well. And you can see kind of how scoring highly in those various different things really acts to help you as a business. Keen to also touch, though, on the consumer side of things, and with Wiltshire Farm Foods, because of the demographic that we have, it's slightly different in that space. And that's where we have to almost work differently between our kind of B2B setting and kind of public sector work and our consumer brand, because the demands and the needs in the different areas are really different, but ultimately we have one target. So we have to somehow bring those differentiations together.
Mike, any reflections from your perspective? You're obviously, you know, a wide range of brands, but let's take Baxter Story, for instance, you know, servicing big blue chip corporate clients. Is there a push from them for you to be demonstrating tangible decarbonisation?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, and we need to. I need to differentiate between clients and customers. Two different things. So the client is the PwCs, the Goldman Sachses of this world, and absolutely they want us to commit. All right, fine. Sometimes it might just be a bit of a tick box, which is quite frustrating, particularly when they ask questions that you've already answered, but they hadn't realised they've asked them. So, for example, have you got ISO 14001? Yes. And have you got an environment policy? Well, clearly, because I've got 14001. So yes, absolutely, and certainly when I started doing this years ago, you know, a bid would be environmental would be 1% of the score, and now we're looking at maybe 30 up to 40% of the score of a bid. From a customer's perspective, not really. Customer's perspective, they want great food. Simple as. And that's where we have got to be in a place where we're not pushing our customers to make environmental choices. We're delivering them environmental choices and nutritious. As I mentioned, you know, holistic, sustainable nutrition is the answer. But absolutely, we're delivering it to them. So there's quite a lot of choice editing goes on. And Bob mentioned it, actually, some of it's without even the customer knowing. Blended burgers, you know, lentils, etc., in a bolognese, all that sort of stuff. And that's dodgy. Well, not known. It's not dodgy. We've got to be careful to do that in the right way, because it can be perceived as you're cutting costs. You know, the customer comes in and says, you know, last month I had 6 pieces of beef on my steak and kidney pie, and now I've got 4 and some extra mushrooms. What's going on? So how you pitch it is really careful. And I think we've talked a lot about stories, and when you need to make that narrative to your customer, then actually the why is really important, and then they'll get it. Because otherwise they will go down the wrong avenue and think you're just cutting costs.
Okay. Any more questions or comments? That's
just looking at the kind of buyers piece from the panel question. How much can you guys see down to your primary producer of your material, right, of your food, You know, how much of it is commoditized so that you don't know how much of it is going from the UK versus France. You know you're buying it from a UK wholesaler, but how much can you see of that, original material to be able to have a discussion about, where your beef's coming from and how to improve that kind of perspective.
So we've got the EU deforest. I just feel like I'm an acronym lady. Look, glossary. There you go. EU deforestation regulation that comes in. I think it's been delayed, so it's December. But that is fundamentally what the expectation is. So beef, it's all Irish or British beef for the UK, which then means that I can tick the deforestation box. Although we did have this is where it gets weird. You start going in, and you're like, my team was like, it's 99%. I was like, what do you mean it's 99%? And they're like, we found 1% Australian beef. And they were like, the question they were asked was like, does Australia have deforestation? It's like, yes. And they're like, what do we do? And I was like, we say we've got 99% deforestation because we couldn't determine whether it was a clerical error, because it still happens, like in systems and with people, clerical error, or whether it was actually sourced from Australia, which is highly unlikely. But the auditors will come in, and we're heavily audited, so it's 99%. But that's the level of granularity we can go down to. A large part of going back to the pledge that I shared at the second slide, is around diverse supply chain. So we do use like larger organisations as the wheels, but to be able to access SMEs and social enterprises so they can come to our clients as well. So then we have that data and that visibility, because it's more regulation driven that we need the traceability these days than actually consumer ask. They do ask like how much is British, and then I say, there will always be levels where you can't have British product. And are you prepared for that? And then it goes back to like how important are welfare as well, because sometimes you can get better welfare from the EU than you can in Britain. So then you start opening up these really great conversations with the client when it's almost like a decision tree, and you start at the beginning and say, we've got all of this and this is what it all looks like. So, and that's what the data and traceability really helps you then have a proper conversation.
Just developing Max's point, we've obviously identified buyers here as agents of change. How much visibility of environmental data are procurement teams getting? Well, I'll leave it there. Let's ask that question, and I'll follow up in a bit. But
do you want me to?
Yeah, no, that was loud. Sorry about that. I would say, we, as part of our second nature strategy, based on 4 key pillars, we've got 2 social pillars, and then we've got 2 environmental. One which is progressive partnerships, and that's all around our supply chain. And we have a lot of targets sitting within supply chain, so we absolutely work hand in glove with procurement. They need us, and we need them. So they need us for data, they need us to understand the technical side, and we need them to be able to do the sourcing. But actually, we work really closely. So Kevin Dunford, our head of fresh food and UK agriculture, we work very closely with him and Charlotte Fagan, with James and Alistair, on how we're actually going to be working that on. We're doing a lot of work on dairy, where actually one of our targets is, RSPCA Freedom Food Assured milk, 100%, and that's quite a tough target, and that means quite a lot of change, but pushing. But absolutely, if we don't work hand in glove, then it's not going to work.
They're my peer, so we're just in the same team. So the way that we're structured, because I noticed in the report there was some that were talking about very decentralised, whereas the organisation that I work with, sometimes they wish that I work in. So the CPO is my peer, the head of culinary is my peer, the data, the CIO, they've all got weird titles, but we're all in the same team as each other, and we call ourselves the engine room. So if we all fall out, then we have to find a way, because we're all in the same team. And so that helps massively. So again, when we put up that iceberg, where sustainability sits in an organisation says volumes about where how important it is. You can put it in sales function, you can put it in marketing, you can put comms, you can put it in finance, and all of those have merits. But what's worked best for us is, you can have a few beers or whatever and actually talk about what we're doing. But again, it's about ownership and empowerment I ask them for the data. I don't own the data.
And are buyers incentivised to deliver, whether it be decarbonisation or a reduction in environmental impact, in the same way that historically they've been incentivised via commercial KPIs?
Okay, I don't want to take over.
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, in absolute fairness, I don't know how they're incentivised. I mean, they are the targets that they have. They are their targets. They're not our targets. I mean, we sit in the procurement and supply chain function as part of that team, and the targets are one and the same.
I can go. Do you want me to go, Lottie? Is that okay? So from a group level, they are absolutely incentivised on money. And it's been my ongoing lobby to get that incentivised on responsible sourcing. But even when they're not incentivized, they still meet their commitments. So I think I would like them to be incentivized more. Their long-term incentives are, so as part of our share plan, if you don't meet the food waste target, if you don't meet the low carbon target, then we won't get the same level of shares. But it's interesting, it goes back to culture, that a lot of those individuals join Sodexo because it's a purpose-led organisation, and we give them the environment where they can go off and do exciting stuff with their supply partners. But I do want to change the incentive mechanism. So that's something that I'm still working on at group, because it comes up a lot, actually. But yeah, that's my battle. So no today, maybe a maybe tomorrow.
Just to bring in a slightly different angle to it, our buyers in particular are regularly out visiting our suppliers. So we spoke about resilience earlier, and I think the way that we've managed to get engagement with our suppliers is that they're actually seeing the supply chain and how it's functioning. So an example I can think of is last year in Europe, a lot of rain, and our supply team or our buyers actually went out to look at the fields during that period and could really see the impact of that. So they're seeing the kind of climate change firsthand, and I think that really helps to get buy-in in that space, because they can see how it's impacting on the product they're buying, and in turn likely the price of the product that they're buying. So they kind of have a very unique connection point to product, which can help to incentivize in a slightly different way. Comes back to the message point that we were talking about at the beginning. Why? If they can see why, then that helps, and that's an example of seeing it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That links back to what we were discussing in the first panel about, yes, data is important, but so are stories and narratives and lived experiences. And yeah, equally relevant on the buying side and down the supply chain. I know, James, that we've spoken before, haven't we, about your work to connect farmers with buyers of their produce, whether that's trips to restaurants or vice versa, chefs and restaurant managers going onto farms. So yeah, building connections that way feels really important. Any other questions? We've got about 5 minutes remaining, so speak now or forever hold your peace. Yes, gentleman at the back.
Follow up to my first question. If 70% of your scope 3 impact as a food production business is in agriculture, core agriculture, so farmers, and I accept McDonald's is probably unique in this one, so McDonald's does know down to the individual animal where it's come from to the burger pretty much. So very impressive what those guys have done with their partners. But very, very few in this industry are actually, whether it's in arable or horticulture or livestock, are doing that. And quite frankly, no one's incentivising, or very little incentivisation for the farmers to do better practices. I'm struggling to see how you can address your scope 3. If you stop your scope 3 visibility at the butcher, then I can kind of get where you've got to, but that's not your full supply chain. And if no one's doing anything to help the farmers, you've got 70% of your scope 3 that's never going to be addressed.
I mean, I think there is a lot of work going on with farmers. Maybe not at scale, but for example, we're doing a lot of work with James and Alistair at Grassroots. We're doing a lot of work with Andy, George, and Ed at Wild Farms. So there is a lot of work going on. We're doing a lot of work with Wells Farm, looking at RSPCA milk, with St. Hugh eggs, etc., etc. So actually, there is a lot of work going on. Sure, there's always going to be scope for doing more, 100%. But actually, looking at how we can work with farmers to get, and we need. I mean, we're after specific emissions factors. We don't know where the beef is coming from. How can we get a specific emissions factor for that product? And then actually that flows through to our scope 3 emissions. So I would say, yeah, we're not. There is always going to be scope for more, but I think there probably is. There already is quite a lot of work going on with farmers. I mentioned earlier within the forum, within Zero Carbon Forum, there's a beef working group. And that's actually looking all the McDonald's and the Burger Kings of this world all talking together, and then actually talking with farmers to see how we can move that forward, along with the NFU as well. So there is quite a lot of engagement, I'd say.
Julia, yeah.
Go, Julia.
With our farmers, so first of all, is a dairy company that we work with, with them on regeneration farming with collecting emissions data. Obviously not the easiest at all.
But they're paying farmers to do that.
Well, we're collaborating with them, and yes, of course, we support them financially on that, but fundamentally it's supporting them with the transition, which means that then the product we get, the emissions will improve over time with the work we're doing, and then we're collecting that data, and then when we have our customers like Sodexo coming and asking for data, then we may be able to provide some. It is a process for us internally to be able to provide that data, and it's not a perfect system at all, but absolutely there is loads and loads of going on.
Can I perhaps put a question back to you? In terms of we hear quite frequently complaints from suppliers, including farmers, about being bombarded with requests for data from different customers, using valuable time and effort that could be put to better use farming. What would motivate farmers, in your view, to invest the time and effort in providing and evidencing that primary data about environmental impact on their farm, and sharing that information down the supply chain? What would be the key kind of motivating factor in them embracing that challenge and wanting to do it?
So farmers have an awful lot of regulatory stuff that they have to go through. In Ireland you get both the audits, here you get the manufacturer audits. What they don't want is yet another thing to fill in. They want to spend the time in the fields with their animals or their crops. So if you have a solution that actually is part of their farming solution and helps them do their actual job, rather than giving them another, whichever one they decide to go for, or multitude of them to go for in the UK, carbon calculator, which I don't know if you've ever tried to use one of these. It's supposedly designed for a farmer, but you'd rather shoot yourself in the head than try and use one. And then when these are farmers, these are people who are not, that isn't what they want to spend the time doing. So unless we can make it easy for them and incentivize them, then they're just not going to do it. I mean, Nestle are right, and first world have got a good solution in order to do that. But you have to incentivize them, you have to give them the solutions that will do it, that actually help them with their day job. So this stuff is a byproduct. It's kind of what I was saying earlier. If you do it project by project, then it's never going to scale. If you actually go in and say, actually, look, if you talk about arable, there's a whole bunch of agronomists in the UK that already give advice on sustainability, know more about soil health than anyone else on the planet, and are the natural people to partner with farmers to actually do sustainability. But are we doing it through them? No, we're doing it through people like Terra. On a project-by-project basis. So make it easy for them.
Great. Thank you for that. I put you on the spot rather there, so appreciate it. We've got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to fire one last question at Claire, who's looking at me eagerly, awaiting another question, I can tell. Linking back to your presentation around supply chain engagement and your net zero supply chain engagement strategy, have you experienced any resistance from suppliers with regards the reporting requirements that you are placing on them? And would you expect any to part ways with you in future because they're not prepared to meet those requirements?
I don't. I don't think so. Because normally the buyers would let me know, and then I'd call the supplier. Because we all know each other. So we have, and again, it goes back to like data and impact and emissions, but it's quite a small group of individuals when you start pulling it down. So, you know, you can have proper conversations with them saying, this is commercially important to us. We do this amount of business with you. These are our expectations from you. We have flow down with you. So what are your challenges? How can we help you on that? But I think, again, it goes back to momentum and market. They've been asked by others, so it becomes just part of the norm, and it just is one of those things which is just core part of delivering a contract these days. I think it'll get harder the further we go up those milestones. So I know not many are talking around SBTI, but again, organisations, and I do worry what Bob said, you know, yeah, we've got SBTI, and then not follow it through. So there might be a bit of a lag for us that we have to be mindful of. But, you know, for us, it's part of sort of driving everybody in the right direction and understanding if they're not doing it, then what's stopping them from doing that. Sometimes, like for example, an SME said we're not doing it because we're about to be acquired. You're like, great, you know, there's no point in doing that, and congratulations, that changes my diversity figures. But yeah, you've got to work with your supply partners, and we introduced it back in 2021, but didn't deploy it straight away. We did a Partners with Purpose conference where we had all our supply partners there, and we presented it. And then every year we talked about it, and the door's always been open, and all the buyers have been well versed and trained in it. So I wouldn't have said so, but wait and see. I'm ready.
Super. Well, it's drinks time. You'll be pleased to know.
Is there snacks?
That's a question for Charlie.
Good, Charlie.
Yes, there are snacks. I think that the thing that's really hit home to me today is that, yes, data is all important, credible, robust data, but it's actually it's where data intersects with great stories, great narratives, where you can really drive change and make the case for change within the organisation. So I think that's something that I'll certainly take away today. Thank you to everyone that's contributed, both on panels and keynotes. Thank you all for attending. Thank you to Foodsteps for your support and making this forum possible. And it is drinks that away.